In the remote village of Blackwater, the children never seemed to age past 12, but a traveling doctor would soon discover a secret older than time itself. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and let's uncover the mystery together. In the remote hills of northern England, hidden beneath the grey wash of perpetual mist, lay the village of Blackwater. It was a place cut off from the roads of progress, a village that seemed untouched by the modern age. Its cobblestone streets twisted like gnarled roots, and the houses, half-timbered and leaning with age, huddled together as though to guard a secret. Travellers rarely found their way there, and those who did often spoke of a strange heaviness that hung in the air, a feeling that the world outside had forgotten Blackwater entirely. Among the peculiarities of the village, none was more striking than its children. To a casual observer, Blackwater's streets were alive with youth. Boys and girls running barefoot over moss-covered stone, their laughter chiming against the fog. But something was quietly wrong. The children never seemed to grow older. A child of 12 would remain 12 for years. Friends from neighbouring towns, visiting only briefly, would remark on the uniformity of their ages, but Blackwater folk laughed it off, attributing it to good health and strong blood. It was Dr. Thomas Hargrove, a travelling physician from London, who first noticed the anomaly in the spring of 1921. He had been summoned to treat a persistent fever among the villagers' livestock, and, as was customary, he offered his services to any human patient who required attention. What drew him in were the children. Unlike the vibrant, healthy youths he had tended elsewhere, these children bore an almost uncanny stillness in their demeanour. They spoke with a maturity that contradicted their physical appearance, their eyes holding a depth that no 12-year-old should possess. At first, Dr. Hargrove suspected a hereditary disease, something that stunted growth or delayed puberty. He conducted careful examinations, noting every pulse, every breath, every angle of bone structure. Yet there was no abnormality to explain what he observed. The children's vital signs were normal, their limbs and organs functioning as they should. But time refused to touch them. He began to ask discreet questions of the villagers, who were polite but evasive. They spoke of local remedies, of diets rich in herbs grown along the riverbanks, of water drawn from a spring that never froze in winter. There was a story, half-whispered by the elders, about the blessing of the children, though its meaning was never clarified. Curiosity prickled Hargrove's instincts. He decided to stay, hoping to uncover the truth beneath the village's carefully maintained veneer. Days turned into weeks, and he watched the children with increasing unease. They played, they argued, they cried, but never grew. He noted their peculiar habits, a fascination with mirrors, a tendency to vanish into the woods for hours, and a secretive ritual each evening when the sun dipped below the horizon. Attempts to follow them were met with shadows and silence. The woods seemed to swallow him whenever he strayed too close. Then came the night of the festival. Each year, Blackwater held a mid-spring celebration, a gathering of villagers in the square with music, dancing, and the lighting of torches. Dr. Hargrove observed from the edge of the crowd as the children assembled in a circle around a stone well that had stood since the village's founding. Their small hands joined, their heads tilted back, eyes reflecting the flickering light, and they began to chant in a language that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He could not hear the words clearly, but the effect was undeniable. The villagers cheered and clapped, yet their voices carried an undertone of reverence, almost fear. Hargrove felt a cold tremor creep over him as he realized that this was no ordinary festival. There was a pattern, a rhythm, a power in the gathering that hinted at something older, something ancient, and wholly unnatural. Hargrove returned to his temporary quarters, restless, examining every note he had taken. He reviewed the children's medical charts and sketches of their growth, or lack thereof. He scrutinized their bone density, their hormonal levels, their reflexes. Nothing explained the phenomenon, and the absence of an explanation only deepened his sense of foreboding. The following morning, he sought out the village historian, an elderly man named Edgar Whittle, whose thin frame was draped in tweed and whose eyes were as sharp as obsidian. "There is something you do not know," Whittle said when pressed. "Something the village guards with its very life. You must understand, Doctor, Blackwater is a place where time does not flow as it does elsewhere." Hargrove pressed him for clarity. Whittle's voice dropped to a whisper. "The children you see, they are not children, not in the sense you think. They never age, yes, but it is not nature that preserves them. They have been bound, in a manner of speaking, to the village. To leave would be to perish." The words settled over Hargrove like a stone. He had suspected many things, but immortality, even of a limited and unnatural kind, was beyond reason. Yet, as he watched the children moving through the streets with their ageless faces and knowing eyes, he could not deny what he saw. Hargrove resolved to uncover the mechanism behind this timelessness, even if it meant trespassing into the darker corners of Blackwater. And he would, in time, learn that the truth was far more sinister than any herbal charm or village superstition. The children were not preserved by magic alone. They were not children at all. Dr. Hargrove's curiosity transformed into obsession. Each morning he rose before dawn, walking the misted streets of Blackwater in silence, watching the children emerge from the shadowed cottages as if from some secret covenant with the dawn. Their faces, unchanging and flawless, carried expressions of knowledge far beyond their apparent age. Some looked at him with something akin to recognition, as though they had anticipated his arrival, while others turned away, small hands pressed to their mouths as if to hold in laughter that had endured decades. He began keeping meticulous records, measuring height, weight, and other physical characteristics each day, only to find the same numbers repeated in his charts. Growth was absent. Even their voices, which sometimes quavered with the innocence of youth, could suddenly articulate thoughts that belonged to a man twice Hargrove's age. His medical training urged him to rationalize the phenomenon, to attribute it to genetic anomaly or a rare endocrinological disorder, but every test he performed yielded ordinary results. Determined to understand, he sought the counsel of another expert, a former professor at Edinburgh, specializing in hereditary disorders. He wrote letters detailing the observations, enclosing sketches and charts, yet received only cautious, incredulous replies. "Impossible," they wrote, "unless there is deception in measurement, or the subjects are not truly as you describe." Hargrove knew there was no deception. The village itself seemed complicit, though in subtle ways. Doors closed just a fraction of a second before he could reach them, voices fell silent when he approached certain cottages, and windows shuttered with an almost deliberate timing. Even the adults seemed different. Their movements were slow, deliberate, measured in a way that suggested a restraint they applied to themselves. He decided to confront the children directly. One afternoon, he approached a group of 3, twins with hair like burnished copper and a boy with black eyes that seemed too deep to belong to a 12-year-old. He knelt to their level, forcing eye contact. "Tell me," he said softly, "what are you? How is it that time has no power over you?" The twins giggled, a sound like glass tinkling. "We are as we are meant to be," the girl said. Her voice was light, but carried an authority that unsettled him. "Time is a river. We are not of the river, but of the shore." Hargrove frowned. "That is not an answer. You grow not, yet your minds seem full of years. What binds you here?" The boy with black eyes stepped closer. His gaze was unwavering. "We belong to Blackwater. To leave is to vanish. You will see, if you pursue further, that the world outside is not made for us." Something in their words stirred unease deep in Hargrove's chest. It was not the warning alone, but the certainty behind it. These were not children merely caught in a strange twist of biology. They were something else entirely. A thought, dark and unwelcome, began to crystallize. Perhaps they had always been like this. Perhaps the village had existed to hide them, to shield the outside world from knowledge of what they truly were. That night, Hargrove could not sleep. He sat at his desk, lit only by a flickering candle, poring over maps, old parish records, and accounts of Blackwater dating back more than a century. There were oddities, sudden disappearances of children from neighboring villages, mysterious illnesses that struck only those who ventured too close, and mentions of a veil that protected the town. The further back he traced the records, the more he realized the pattern. Centuries of careful concealment, of lives quietly erased to preserve the village's secret. The turning point came when he witnessed a small group of children slipping silently through the woods toward the old stone well at the forest's edge. Hidden behind gnarled oaks, Hargrove watched as they gathered, chanting softly, their voices harmonizing in an eerie, almost mechanical precision. The ground beneath them seemed to pulse, faintly, as though responding to the cadence of their words. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, flickering with a life of their own, while the mist swirled in patterns that defied the wind. It was then that Hargrove saw the truth, horrifying in its clarity. As he blinked, certain figures shimmered, as though their forms were less solid than flesh. Their faces, though childlike in shape, flickered with glimpses of older, darker expressions, as if the years they had stolen, or been denied, were etched upon some hidden layer beneath their skin. He stumbled backward, catching his coat on a low branch, and the children froze, turning toward him as one. The boy with black eyes whispered, almost gently, "You see now. Do you still wish to understand?" Hargrove's heart pounded. The rational mind that had carried him across continents, the disciplined curiosity that had made him a respected physician, faltered. He realized that the town's secret was alive, not merely preserved, but active, and that the children themselves were central to its power. Returning to his quarters, he tried to convince himself it was illusion, perhaps fatigue, perhaps overactive imagination. Yet in the quiet hours, when the mist pressed against the window-pane and the village seemed to hold its breath, he knew he could not escape the truth. The children of Blackwater were immortal, but their immortality was no gift. It was a chain, binding them to a fate far older and darker than anyone from the outside world could imagine. The next morning, he resolved to explore the woods fully, to trace the children's ritual to its source. Each step toward the forest edge felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted him. And when he finally reached the old stone well, he felt an energy unlike anything he had known, a force both alluring and repelling, whispering promises of understanding and threats of oblivion. Hargrove knelt at the edge of the well, peering into its depths, and for the first time, he glimpsed something more than the reflection of mist and sky. He saw history, twisted and coiled, centuries of children who had come before, of secrets carefully kept and lives suspended in perpetual liminality. And at the center of it all, the ones he had been observing, waiting for him to see them fully, waiting for him to recognize the truth. They weren't children at all. The forest pressed close, dense with blackened oak and twisted undergrowth, and Dr. Hargrove felt the chill of an unseen presence brushing against his skin. Each step toward the stone well was deliberate, measured, as if the earth itself remembered centuries of this same pilgrimage and judged intruders harshly. The fog thickened, curling around his ankles, and with every rustle of leaves, he sensed the children's awareness, their silent observation from hidden paths and shadowed clearings. The well, ancient and covered with moss, stood as the heart of Blackwater's secret. Its stone walls were slick with condensation, and its opening yawned like the mouth of some slumbering creature. The children gathered around it, forming a tight circle, hands clasped, eyes closed. Their chant rose in a low, undulating hum that vibrated through the soil. Hargrove crouched behind a cluster of gnarled roots, straining to comprehend the sound. It was language, yes, but more than that. It carried resonance, a force that seemed to tug at the very marrow of his bones. And then he saw it, the shimmer. Where their hands touched, a faint distortion appeared, like heat rising from a sun-scorched stone, and the mist around them coiled and danced as if alive. Hargrove realized with growing horror that this was no mere ritual, no symbolic display. The children were drawing energy, something older than memory, from the well. The earth itself seemed to pulse with life, and they drank from it, not with mouths, but with something far more intimate, far more profound. A sudden noise, a snapping branch, made him freeze. The children's chant faltered for the briefest instant, and Hargrove held his breath, praying they would not notice him. When their voices resumed, softer this time, he realized they were aware of him, not in the way that children notice strangers, but in a deeper, more intrinsic sense. They had always known he would come, that he would watch, that he would seek the truth. One of them, the boy with black eyes, stepped forward, moving as though part of the mist itself. His gaze was sharp, unyielding. "You seek answers," he said, his voice carrying over the chant. "Yet every answer comes with a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" Hargrove swallowed hard. The rational part of him, the part trained to diagnose, to measure, to control, struggled against instinct. "I must know," he said. "I cannot leave without understanding what you are." The boy nodded, a subtle motion that sent a shiver down Hargrove's spine. "Then you will see, and perhaps you will regret it. We are not children. Never were. This village exists for us, and we exist for it. Time does not touch us because the village itself bends to keep us so. Our forms are young, but our essence is ancient, carried through the cycles of those who came before. You will learn what it means to be bound." Hargrove felt the words as much as he heard them. They carried weight, inevitability, a history that stretched beyond the lifetimes of ordinary men. And yet he pressed forward, moving closer to the circle, feeling the cold stone of the well beneath his fingers. The chant swelled again, a tide of sound that seemed to seep into his very thoughts, carrying memories that were not his own, memories of children long dead, of families lost, of centuries of concealment. Then the first transformation occurred. One of the twins, the girl with copper hair, lifted her hand, and Hargrove saw the subtle undulation beneath her skin. It was as if her flesh and bone were layered over something else entirely, a structure that shimmered with faint luminescence. Her eyes, still those of a child, flickered momentarily into something older, darker, knowing. He staggered back, a rush of nausea overwhelming him. "They were never children," he whispered to himself, voice trembling. "Not ever. They only appear so." The boy with black eyes crouched beside him, almost imperceptibly, his presence a shadow upon the fog. "We preserve ourselves. We endure. The village sustains us, and in return we sustain it. To leave is death. To interfere is peril." Hargrove wanted to speak, to protest, but the chant grew louder, and the well seemed to pulse in response, an echo of his own heartbeat magnified 1,000-fold. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon him, and in that moment the village was no longer just a collection of houses and streets. It was alive. It breathed, it watched, it demanded obedience. The realization came with stark clarity. The children's immortality was a tether, a symbiosis with Blackwater itself. The village's soil, its water, its stones, all were part of the mechanism. It was a living network, ancient and secret, preserving forms that should have aged and decayed, binding them to a destiny beyond comprehension. Hargrove retreated into the shadows, clutching his coat, struggling to retain the boundaries of his own identity. He had glimpsed a truth that would haunt him for years. The children who never aged were not miraculous, nor innocent. They were the products of an unnatural covenant, creatures suspended between time and eternity, and their very existence demanded secrecy, obedience, and sacrifice. As he left the forest that night, Hargrove understood that his journey had only begun. To uncover more would require him to navigate a web of history, superstition, and dark ritual. The children's secret was vast, layered, and dangerous, and somewhere in the twisting streets of Blackwater, the villagers watched him, waiting to see whether he would respect the boundary or overstep it, and whether, in doing so, he might join the cycle he had only just begun to understand. The days that followed were restless and haunted. Dr. Hargrove could not shake the image of the children around the well, their small forms concealing something immeasurably old and powerful. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shimmer beneath their skin, the flicker of age that had been hidden for centuries. He began to realize that Blackwater itself had become a prison not only for them but for him, a place where time and space bent subtly to enforce its secret. Hargrove tried to maintain a facade of normalcy during his consultations with villagers. Mothers brought fevers and minor injuries. Fathers sought advice for strains and bruises. Yet he could not focus. The children seemed to appear in every corner of his vision, watching silently from the edges of his perception. At night, he dreamed of the forest, of the stone well, of chanting voices that spoke in a language he did not know but somehow understood. One evening, he resolved to speak with Edgar Whittle, the village historian. Whittle's home was a narrow, timbered building that leaned precariously toward the street. Hargrove found him in the parlor, sitting in a high-backed chair, a ledger open on his lap. The old man looked up as he entered, eyes glinting with an unsettling awareness. "You've seen them," Whittle said without preamble, "and you have begun to understand. It is no small burden, Doctor. Few endure it without fracturing." Hargrove sat, rubbing his temples. "Tell me everything," he said. "I need to know the truth. How did this begin? How are the children preserved?" Whittle's expression darkened. Blackwater was founded on an old covenant, older than any map will show. The village sits atop a convergence of forces, energies that refuse decay. The children are conduits. Their bodies remain young, but within them flows the lifeblood of the village itself. It is not a gift, it is a bond, and it demands vigilance. How do they maintain it? Hargrove asked, voice low. The well, the chants, what is happening there? Whittle rose slowly and moved to the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded street. The well is an anchor, a node in a web older than memory. The ritual draws from the land, the water, the stone, the trees. It channels vitality into the children, but it is no natural process. It is deliberate, cultivated over generations. To break it would unravel them, and the village. Hargrove felt a chill. And the villagers? They all know. Whittle nodded. All who dwell here have accepted their roles. Some guard the secret, some participate, some watch. All understand the consequence of revealing the truth. The children, they are not fully human, not in the way we understand. And they know. That night, Hargrove returned to his quarters, unsettled. The knowledge that the village itself had grown around a deliberate suspension of life, and that he had only glimpsed the surface, gnawed at him. He realized he had crossed a threshold. There was no longer a way to observe safely. He had become part of the story, a participant in a covenant that had existed long before he had been born. Determined to learn more, he ventured into the woods once again. The mist hung low, damp against his skin, and the branches seemed to twist unnaturally, forming corridors that led him deeper than he had ever ventured. Eventually, he arrived at the stone well. The children were there, as expected, but this time they did not chant. Instead, they sat quietly, eyes closed, forming a perfect circle around the moss-covered edge. The boy with black eyes rose and stepped toward him. "You have returned," he said softly, almost reproachfully. "It is one thing to observe, another to seek to know. Are you certain you are prepared for the truth?" Hargrove nodded, swallowing his fear. "I must know. I cannot turn away." The children's eyes opened simultaneously, reflecting the dim light of the moon above. Hargrove felt their gaze penetrate him, seeing not only his physical form but the fears, desires, and limitations within him. He shivered. "I see now that you are not what you appear," he murmured. "But what are you?" The boy's lips curved in something like a smile. "We are the children who never aged, yes. But we are also the village, bound, preserved, eternal. We are not innocent, not simple, not human in the sense you understand. Each of us carries centuries of memory, of ritual, of those who came before. We are both vessel and guardian. Time does not touch us because we are outside it." Hargrove felt the weight of the revelation settle into his chest. "And the village itself?" "It lives because we live," the boy said. "We sustain it. It sustains us. To break this balance would mean death for all. Ours, theirs, yours." The doctor's rational mind raced. The implications were staggering. A self-sustaining cycle of immortality, a deliberate preservation of life through ritual and secret knowledge, a covenant older than most nations. Yet beneath the awe, he sensed a deeper danger. The children were not merely alive. They were aware, active, calculating. Their power was subtle but immense, and any attempt to interfere could unravel not only Blackwater, but any who dared to pry too deeply. Hargrove realized that the children had chosen him, or perhaps anticipated his arrival, not simply as a witness, but as a potential participant. The knowledge he had gained was both a gift and a curse. To leave would mean carrying the burden of what he had seen, yet to stay was to step closer to a fate he did not yet understand. As he turned to leave, the boy spoke once more, voice low and insistent. "Remember this, Doctor. Curiosity is a chain. Knowledge is a tether. The longer you pursue, the tighter it becomes. Blackwater does not forgive the unprepared." Hargrove walked back through the mist, every sense alert. The village seemed alive in a new way, aware of him, watching him, testing his resolve. He understood that the secret was no longer something to observe from a distance. It had marked him. The children's power extended beyond their forms, beyond the well, beyond even the forest. It had reached him, and in that realization the true danger became clear. To know the secret of Blackwater was to risk becoming part of it, bound forever to the children who never aged, to the village that held them, and to a covenant older and darker than anything he had ever imagined. Days turned into restless nights, each one heavier than the last. Dr. Hargrove could no longer separate himself from Blackwater. The village had become an all-encompassing presence, a living entity that watched him, measured him, and quietly tested his limits. Even when he attempted to leave the streets for his lodgings, he found himself retracing steps, drawn by an unseen current toward the forest, toward the stone well, toward the children whose eyes seemed to pierce the veil between life and eternity. Hargrove resolved to document everything. He filled notebooks with sketches of the children, detailed measurements, and observations of the rituals he had witnessed. He described the shimmer beneath their skin, the unnatural stillness of the village, the pulsations of energy around the well. Each entry grew darker as he tried to understand not only the mechanics of the children's preservation, but the psychology behind it. There was intelligence in their stillness, a calculated patience that spoke of centuries of observation and self-control. One afternoon, he encountered the twins in the square. The copper-haired girl's gaze held him, and for a moment, time itself seemed to slow. She smiled faintly, but there was no innocence in the expression. Her brother, the boy with black eyes, lingered nearby, watching Hargrove with a calm intensity. "You watch too closely," the girl said. Her voice was soft, almost musical, yet the authority in it made Hargrove flinch. "Observation without understanding is dangerous. Do you think you can see what we see and remain unchanged?" "I must understand," Hargrove replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I cannot walk away." The twins exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, a silent conversation older than any language he knew. "Then you will follow," the boy said. "Not just to the well, but deeper, where history sleeps and the village remembers. Few outsiders endure this. Many fall away, frightened by the weight of what they discover. Are you prepared to see beyond what is safe?" Hargrove hesitated, knowing instinctively that once he stepped forward, he could not turn back. Yet the compulsion to understand, to see the truth fully, was stronger than fear. He nodded. The children led him through a narrow alley that ended at the edge of the forest. The mist was thicker here, curling around roots and stones, and the air hummed faintly, as though carrying whispers of lives long ended. The forest seemed alive in a way he had not noticed before. Trees leaned toward him, branches twisting like fingers, and shadows moved independently of the light. It was a living memory of Blackwater itself, a place where the boundary between past and present, between life and something else, had eroded. At the well, the ritual had begun. More children were gathered now, their small hands joined, eyes closed, chanting in harmony. The pulse beneath their fingers intensified, and Hargrove felt it in his chest, in his bones. Energy, he realized, was being drawn not only from the land but from the village, from the history of the children, from centuries of human fear and complicity. "You see now," the boy with black eyes said, appearing at his side. "This is not magic. It is preservation. It is order. It is power that is older than any man who walks the earth. And it is ours." Hargrove's mind reeled. The children's immortality was not merely a biological anomaly. It was a covenant, a binding force that had shaped Blackwater for centuries. Each generation of children had contributed to the ritual, sustaining themselves and the village in tandem. The thought of leaving, of exposing the secret, of disturbing the delicate balance, sent a chill through him. The twins raised their hands, and the chant shifted, harmonics layering over one another like threads in a loom. Hargrove felt time stretch and bend around him. Images flashed in his mind, centuries of children, rituals repeated, villages that had fallen away, outsiders who had disappeared, and the silent, unwavering presence of the covenant that preserved Blackwater. And then one of the girls spoke, her voice cutting through the resonance. "Do you understand, Doctor? You cannot interfere. You cannot reveal. To do so is to unravel what has endured for lifetimes." Hargrove nodded, trembling. "I understand," he said, but deep inside, he knew that comprehension carried its own peril. Knowledge, he realized, was not a liberation here. It was a tether, binding him to a destiny not of his choosing. He withdrew slightly, remaining at the edge of the circle, watching as the pulse of life, ritual, and memory converged in the children. The shimmer beneath their skin grew brighter, and for a moment he glimpsed the depth of centuries within their eyes. Not merely children, not merely preserved, but something altogether different, being suspended between life and eternity, guardians and prisoners all at once. As he left the well that night, the fog pressed against him like a living thing, the village silent but aware. Hargrove realized that Blackwater's secret was not merely in the children. It was in the soil, in the stones, in every heartbeat of the village. And he also understood that he had crossed a boundary. There would be no return to ignorance, no safe passage back to the world outside. The covenant had accepted him as witness, and perhaps as participant, whether he wished it or not. In the days that followed, Hargrove noticed subtle changes in the village. Shadows seemed to linger longer, whispers of wind carried faintly melodic voices, and the children appeared at places before he could reach them, as though anticipating his movements. The presence of the covenant was undeniable. The village itself was alive, vigilant, and inexorably linked to the children. He had stepped into a history older than his imagination, and the path forward was perilous. The children of Blackwater were no longer just a mystery to observe. They were a force, deliberate and eternal, and their world had now begun to shape him in return. Dr. Hargrove's nights became restless, haunted not only by the children's gaze, but by the weight of Blackwater itself. Sleep brought no respite. In his dreams, the forest's roots twisted through his mind, the well pulsed beneath him, and the chants of the children echoed endlessly. He awoke each morning with a feeling of being watched, as though the village itself had become a living eye, observing his every thought and action. He tried to rationalize his experiences. Perhaps it was fatigue, stress, isolation. Yet each observation, each recording, each careful measurement confirmed what he had already seen. The children did not age. Their forms shimmered with something that transcended flesh and bone, their eyes holding histories older than the village itself. Blackwater was a living covenant, and he had been drawn into its orbit. One afternoon, he sought out Whittle once more, hoping to gain further insight. The historian welcomed him with an expression both weary and solemn. "You have seen more than most," Whittle said, "and the burden is growing. Knowledge here is a double-edged blade. It cuts the ignorant and the unprepared alike." Hargrove's hands trembled as he set his notebooks on the table. "I must understand the mechanics," he said. "The well, the ritual, the children. How is this preservation possible? How does the village sustain them, and them the village?" Whittle sighed, settling into his chair. "It is as I told you, and yet more. The well is a nexus, a conduit through which the lifeblood of the land flows. The children are vessels, bound to it, and through them it is sustained. Time has no dominion over them because they are part of the mechanism itself. It is neither natural nor human. It is deliberate, ancient, and unyielding." Hargrove leaned forward, his mind racing. "And the rituals? The chanting, the gatherings, the chants focus and direct the energy," Whittle explained. "They are precise, inherited from one generation to the next. Each child contributes, consciously or not. To disrupt it would unravel the bond, and the consequences are unimaginable. The village, and those bound within it, cannot survive such interference." Later that evening, Hargrove ventured once more into the forest, drawn inexorably to the well. He felt a shift in the air as he approached, a subtle vibration under his feet. The children were there, silent, forming their circle. The shimmer beneath their skin was stronger now, more pronounced, as though the energy of the forest itself flowed visibly through them. The boy with black eyes emerged from the circle, speaking in a voice that carried both warning and patience. "You have come far," he said, "but understanding is not without peril. Do you grasp the depth of what you seek?" Hargrove nodded. "I see it now. I understand that your existence is bound to the village, and the village to you. But I must know more. How far does this covenant extend?" The children's eyes glimmered, and for a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath. "The covenant extends to the very heart of Blackwater," the boy said. "It is older than any living memory, woven into the soil, the stones, the waters. Our preservation is only one thread. The village itself thrives because of us, and we endure because of it. This balance has lasted centuries, carefully maintained by those who understand its necessity." Hargrove felt the weight of the centuries pressing down upon him. "And if someone outside interfered?" he asked quietly. The boy's gaze darkened. "They would perish, as would the village. Blackwater guards its own. The covenant allows no violation, no intrusion. Time, life, death. They are measured here by rules older than any man can comprehend. You, Doctor, have been accepted as witness. That is both privilege and warning. You must tread carefully." Hargrove realized the truth. He had crossed a boundary that could not be undone. Knowledge itself had become a binding force. The children were not merely preserved. They were arbiters, guardians of a secret that defied natural law. To know it was to be tethered, part of a history that stretched backward into centuries of careful concealment and forward into an uncertain, eternal continuity. The mist deepened around him, curling like living fingers through the forest, and Hargrove felt an irresistible pull toward the well. He knelt at its edge once more, staring into its dark depths, seeing reflections not just of himself but of generations of children, of rituals performed and repeated, of the unbroken covenant that had preserved life against the flow of time. And then the realization struck him fully. The children's immortality was not a gift. It was a chain, and the village's secret had ensnared him. The longer he remained, the more entwined he became, until he could no longer tell where observer ended and covenant began. As he left the forest that night, every shadow seemed heavier, every whisper sharper. Blackwater itself had marked him, and the children's eyes followed him from every corner, silent but insistent. He understood now that curiosity was not neutral here. It was a tether, a choice with consequences. Every step he took was measured, every glance noted, every thought registered in the balance that governed the village. Hargrove knew one thing with clarity. He could not leave Blackwater unchanged, and whether he intended to participate in the covenant or resist it, the village, the children, and the well were already shaping his fate. The days grew colder, the mist more persistent, and Dr. Hargrove felt the village's pulse in every footstep, every breath. Blackwater no longer seemed simply a place. It was a living entity, ancient and deliberate, and he sensed that it was aware of him as he was of it. Even the smallest disturbances, the shuffle of a boot against cobblestone, the snapping of a twig in the woods, seemed amplified, noted, and catalogued by unseen forces. Hargrove had begun to observe the children not as medical curiosities, but as agents of the covenant itself. Their unchanging forms were merely the surface. Beneath, they held something timeless, a consciousness that had accumulated knowledge over centuries. The twins, with their uncanny awareness, often appeared at moments he did not expect, guiding him toward, or away from, events and places he could not yet fully comprehend. One evening, he followed the copper-haired girl down an overgrown path behind the cottages, winding into the forest where he had never dared venture alone. She moved silently, the mist curling around her as though part of her, leading him to a clearing he had never seen. At the center lay an ancient stone altar, weathered and cracked, surrounded by carved runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. "This is older than the well," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "It is where the covenant was first formed, where the first children were bound to the village. The magic here, it is older than your understanding." Hargrove knelt beside the altar, tracing the grooves of the carvings with trembling fingers. Symbols shifted subtly under his touch, almost imperceptibly, like a heartbeat he could not quite hear. He realized that these markings were not decorative. They were functional, conduits of the same energy he had witnessed at the well. The children were not merely recipients of preservation. They were active participants in an ancient design, conduits channeling forces that he could barely comprehend. "You must see it fully," the girl continued. "The well sustains our forms. The forest channels the energy. The altar anchors the covenant to this place. Every child who comes here adds to it. Every ritual preserves it. It is not merely survival. It is order." Hargrove's mind reeled. "And if the balance is broken?" he asked. Her eyes darkened. "Death, chaos, dissolution. The village cannot exist without the covenant, and the covenant cannot exist without the children. The cost is too great to risk. He felt a chill, a premonition that the weight of centuries pressed against him. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet he could not turn away. The children's knowledge, their awareness, was not only mesmerizing but authoritative. They had long ago mastered the subtle power that tethered them to Blackwater, and in their presence, even the most rational part of him wavered. Over the next days, Hargrove observed patterns he had missed before. The children's movements through the village were deliberate, calculated to maintain equilibrium. They visited certain houses, paused at wells and trees, and even seemed to adjust the mist, guiding it like a living map over the village. Every action was measured, purposeful, unseen by adults who went about their daily lives unaware of the Covenant's intricate choreography. One night, he followed the boy with black eyes to the forest's edge, where a faintly glowing stream emerged from beneath gnarled roots. The water was thick with sediment, dark as ink, yet it pulsed with a subtle energy. The boy dipped his hands into the current, and Hargrove felt the air thrum around them. "This stream," the boy explained, "feeds the well, carries vitality to the village, and preserves the balance. It has flowed unchanged for centuries, its power intertwined with the children. To disrupt it would unravel the covenant entirely." Hargrove knelt at the edge of the stream, reaching cautiously toward the water. He could feel it in his veins, a subtle resonance that hummed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He realized that the covenant was not passive. It was alive, responsive, and aware. It judged, it rewarded, and it punished. And the children, forever young in form, were its agents and guardians. By the following morning, he had made a decision. Observation alone was insufficient. To understand the covenant fully, he would have to participate, to witness its full power, and perhaps to endure its consequences. The knowledge he had gained had already bound him in subtle ways. Ignorance was no longer an option. That night, as he approached the well once more, he saw the children gathered in the familiar circle, the shimmer beneath their skin bright and pulsating. The forest seemed to lean toward them, the mist coiling in hypnotic patterns. He knelt at the edge, feeling the rhythm of the covenant, the pulse of centuries of preservation. "You have chosen," the boy with black eyes said, appearing at his side. "To see fully is to commit fully. There is no turning back once the covenant touches you. Are you ready?" Hargrove swallowed, the weight of inevitability pressing upon him. "I am ready," he whispered. The children nodded, and the chant began once more, low and resonant, pulling at the very essence of the forest, the village, and Hargrove himself. He felt time bend and stretch, saw glimpses of the past and future, of children long gone and centuries of rituals, and he realized that the covenant was not merely preservation. It was dominion, a force older than humanity, maintained through vigilance, sacrifice, and unending cycles. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the well, he understood fully. To know Blackwater's secret was not merely to witness. It was to be inexorably drawn into its eternal, unyielding orbit. The forest seemed to close around Dr. Hargrove as he remained at the edge of the well, drawn deeper into the rhythm of the covenant. The chant of the children rose and fell like a living tide, vibrating through the earth and threading through the very marrow of his bones. Time itself seemed to bend here. Seconds stretched and compressed, hours dissolved into moments, and the past whispered its secrets into his mind. The boy with black eyes watched him closely, a sentinel guiding him through the incomprehensible. "You feel it now," he said softly, the weight of centuries, the pulse of generations. It is not merely ritual, Doctor. It is order, life, and continuity. We are the vessel, the village, and the memory. Without us, all would collapse. Hargrove struggled to comprehend. He had spent his life pursuing knowledge, seeking understanding of the human body, of illness and healing, yet nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Here, biology was entwined with forces older than memory, and the children, so impossibly young in form, were conduits for an energy that defied comprehension. Over the next weeks, he observed more closely, noting subtleties that had eluded him before. The children moved through the village with an uncanny precision, their paths avoiding certain cracks in the cobblestones and following invisible patterns over moss and stone. Adults went about their lives, unaware of the unseen choreography guiding every step, every heartbeat. Even the elements, the mist, the trees, the streams, seemed to bend subtly to maintain balance. One evening, the copper-haired twin led him to a secluded grove. At its center lay a pool of black water, smooth and reflective as glass, surrounded by stones carved with runes similar to those on the altar. The water pulsed faintly, and the air vibrated with a quiet hum. "This is where the covenant begins," she said. "It is the source, the anchor. Everything flows from here. The well, the village, the children, they all draw from it. It is old, older than any record, and it remembers." Hargrove knelt beside the pool, gazing into its depths. He saw reflections of the children, their faces shifting between youth and something older, something knowing, layered with centuries of memory. He saw echoes of the village, of generations of caretakers, of outsiders who had glimpsed the secret and vanished. And he understood. The covenant was not passive. It was alive, responsive, aware. It judged, it tested, and it preserved. The boy with black eyes appeared beside him. "Do you understand, Doctor?" he asked. "The covenant is eternal. It requires vigilance, balance, and sacrifice. To witness it fully is to be bound to it. You cannot leave unchanged." Hargrove swallowed, the weight of inevitability pressing on him. "I understand," he said. "I see now that this is beyond anything I have known. But what is my role?" The boy's gaze held his. "Your role is to witness, to learn, and perhaps to endure. You are not yet a participant, but the longer you observe, the deeper the bond becomes. Knowledge is a tether, Doctor, and every step you take draws you closer to the Covenant's heart." In the following days, Hargrove noted changes in himself. His awareness sharpened. He could sense the presence of the children even when they were out of sight. He felt the rhythm of the village in his own pulse, the subtle tug of the well and the pool beneath his skin. Even the mist seemed to respond to him, coiling and lifting as he moved. He realized, with a mix of awe and dread, that Blackwater was already shaping him, drawing him into its eternal orbit. One night, the children gathered at the well for a ritual more elaborate than any he had witnessed. The mist thickened, swirling around their small bodies, and the forest itself seemed to pulse in resonance with their chant. Hargrove knelt at the edge, feeling the energy flow through him, the weight of centuries pressing down, the Covenant's rhythm echoing in his bones. The boy with black eyes spoke again, his voice low and deliberate. "You are here by choice, Doctor. But choice is fragile. Knowledge binds, curiosity chains. You will learn that the covenant does not forgive the unprepared, and those who step too close often vanish. Observe carefully, or you will become part of the balance, whether you wish it or not. Hargrove understood. Every observation, every note, every sketch had drawn him deeper into the secret. The children's immortality was no longer a curiosity. It was a living force, a mechanism of preservation older than humanity, and he had already become entangled. To leave was impossible, not physically, perhaps, but spiritually. His mind, his perception, his very essence were already linked to the rhythm of Blackwater. As the ritual ended and the children dispersed into the mist, Hargrove remained kneeling, absorbing the weight of what he had witnessed. The village lay silent around him, yet he could feel its heartbeat, a steady, ancient pulse that carried both promise and warning. He realized that Blackwater's secret was no longer something he could simply study. It was something that had claimed him, marking him as witness, tethered by knowledge, bound by inevitability. And in that moment, he understood fully. To see the children who never aged was not merely to observe. It was to step into eternity, into a covenant older and more relentless than any human imagination, from which there could be no return. The following weeks brought Hargrove a grim clarity. Blackwater was no longer simply a village, nor were the children merely preserved. They were sentinels, embodiments of a covenant older than memory, and he had become a part of their orbit. Every step he took, every observation he recorded, fed into the rhythm of the village, tightening the tether that bound him to the children and to the well, to the forest, and to the unseen currents that governed everything. He began to see the patterns in finer detail. The children's movements were deliberate and precise, choreographed across the village to maintain balance. One would pause at a door, another near a well, a third under a tree whose roots ran deep into hidden streams. Adults moved obliviously, yet the children's steps seemed to manipulate the world subtly, shaping air, mist, even the shadows, to preserve an equilibrium Hargrove could barely comprehend. One night, he followed the twins deeper into the forest than he had ever dared go. The path narrowed, overgrown, twisted in impossible angles, yet the children moved with absolute certainty. At the heart of the forest, they arrived at a cavern beneath a gnarled ancient oak. The entrance was dark and suffused with a cold, resonant hum. The copper-haired girl gestured for him to enter. "Here lies the origin," she said. "Here is where the first covenant was forged, where the children were first bound to the village. Few outsiders ever see this." Inside, the cavern was lit by a phosphorescent glow emanating from veins in the stone walls. At the center lay a shallow pool, dark as obsidian, reflecting the faint light. The air vibrated with energy, subtle but undeniable. Hargrove knelt at the edge, peering into the water, and saw layers upon layers of reflection. Children of the past, villagers long dead, rituals repeated countless times, each generation contributing to the preservation of form, of life, of Blackwater itself. The boy with black eyes appeared beside him. "The covenant is alive," he said. "It remembers, it judges, it preserves. Time flows around us, but we are outside it. The pool holds memory, the well channels life, the forest sustains the balance. Every child is both vessel and guardian. You are seeing it because you were chosen, or perhaps because the covenant sensed your curiosity would not waver." Hargrove's mind raced. "And if the balance is broken?" The boy's eyes darkened. "Death, dissolution, chaos. All that is bound here would unravel. The children would perish, the village would collapse, and outsiders would vanish. It is why secrecy is absolute. The Covenant does not forgive interference. You must understand that every step you take now is measured, and the consequences of misstep extend beyond your comprehension. Hargrove felt the enormity of what he had entered. His rational mind, trained in medicine and observation, struggled to reconcile the impossibility before him. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The children shimmered with latent energy, the water pulsed with the weight of centuries, and the cavern itself seemed alive, aware, responsive to their presence. He spent days at the cavern's edge, recording, observing, attempting to decipher the mechanisms at play. The rituals, he realized, were not merely symbolic. They were functional, each movement precise, each chant harmonizing with the energy in the stones, water, and forest. The children were conduits of preservation, sustaining not only themselves but the village, the Covenant, and the rhythm that held it all together. Hargrove began to sense the subtle ways the Covenant was extending into him. He noticed changes in his perception. Shadows seemed to linger longer when he passed. Whispers of wind carried faint echoes of the children's chants, and he occasionally glimpsed reflections in water or glass that flickered with images not his own. He was becoming a participant whether he wished it or not, drawn inexorably into the rhythm that had shaped Blackwater for centuries. One night, the children gathered at the cavern for a ritual unlike any Hargrove had seen. The mist of the forest crept in, curling over roots and rocks, coiling around their small bodies. Their chant rose in complex harmonics, and the pool glowed brighter, reflecting layers of memory, time, and energy. Hargrove knelt at the edge, feeling the pulse of centuries, of lives preserved and lost, of a covenant that refused to bend to human comprehension. The boy with black eyes leaned close. "You have seen enough now," he said. "The Covenant has claimed your awareness. You are bound by knowledge, tethered by observation. There is no return to ignorance. You are part of the balance now, Doctor, whether you wish it or not. Remember this. The children are not merely alive. They are eternal, and the village lives because of them." Hargrove's heart pounded. He realized that Blackwater's secret had become inseparable from him. Knowledge itself was a chain, binding him to a fate he could not escape. Every moment he remained in the village drew him deeper into the Covenant's rhythm, entwining him with the children, the forest, the wells, and the unseen currents that preserved life against the flow of time. As he emerged from the cavern, the mist pressing close, Hargrove understood fully that he had crossed a threshold. To witness the children was to participate. To understand Blackwater was to be entwined in its eternal, unyielding orbit. And the longer he stayed, the more his fate became indistinguishable from the very Covenant he sought to study. The culmination of Dr. Hargrove's journey unfolded as the first pale light of dawn filtered through Blackwater's ever-present mist. The village, shrouded in centuries of secrecy, seemed to exhale, the rhythm of its hidden life pulsing through every stone, every stream, every tree. Hargrove now understood with unwavering clarity that he had crossed the boundary from observer to participant. There was no turning back. He had been marked by knowledge, tethered to the Covenant that sustained the children and preserved the village itself. The children assembled once more at the well, their small forms radiant in the dim morning glow. The shimmer beneath their skin pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat visible to those attuned to it. Hargrove approached carefully, feeling the subtle currents of energy brushing against him, almost tangible, almost alive. "You are here," the boy with black eyes said, And now you understand. You see not only the children, but the covenant, the rhythm, the balance that endures. You know that time does not touch us, that the village lives because we live, and we endure because it sustains us. And you know that knowledge is binding. Hargrove nodded, his pulse quickening, aware of the irrevocable truth. I understand. I cannot leave unchanged. I cannot return to the world outside. Everything I have seen, everything I know, binds me here. The copper-haired twin stepped forward. You have witnessed the full measure of the covenant. The well, the forest, the pool beneath the ancient oak, they are threads in a tapestry that stretches across centuries. To disrupt them is to unravel all. And now, Doctor, you are part of the weave. Observe, remember, endure. Hargrove knelt beside the well, feeling the pulse of the village in the stones beneath his fingers, in the flowing water, in the mist that seemed alive with awareness. He sensed the history of the children, of the generations that had come before, of rituals repeated with precision, of lives devoted to maintaining balance. And he realized that Blackwater was not merely a place. It was a living covenant, eternal and unyielding. The children raised their joined hands, and the chant began again. Hargrove felt the energy flow through him, subtle but insistent, threading through his body and mind. It was not merely preservation. It was continuity, a force that extended beyond individual life into something grander, timeless and deliberate. He glimpsed the centuries layered within the covenant, children long gone, rituals repeated countless times, generations of villagers who had safeguarded the secret. And he understood that the children who never aged were not merely preserved. They were central, the nexus through which Blackwater endured, the guardians of an order older than memory. The mist wrapped around Hargrove as he watched, and he sensed the village itself respond to his presence. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every ripple in the well acknowledged him, folded him into the rhythm. He was no longer an outsider. Knowledge had claimed him, and with it, he had become part of the covenant's delicate, unbroken cycle. The boy with black eyes leaned close, voice low and measured. Remember this, Doctor. You have seen the covenant in its fullness. Time cannot touch the children, and the village lives because of them. You are witness, now, bound by observation, tethered by understanding. Curiosity brought you here, but knowledge binds you. There is no return. Hargrove nodded, absorbing the weight of inevitability. He felt the pulse of the well, the whisper of the forest, the living presence of the village coursing through him. The covenant had claimed him entirely, not in body alone, but in mind and spirit. He understood that his role was observation, endurance, and silent participation in a rhythm older than life itself. The children's chant subsided as the first rays of sun pierced the mist. The shimmer beneath their skin faded, replaced by the familiar appearance of youth, yet Hargrove knew the truth beneath the surface. Centuries of memory, ritual, and preservation flowed through them still. He looked around the village, now alive with quiet awareness, every shadow and stone participating in the covenant. And as he walked through Blackwater, the weight of eternity pressing upon him, he knew that the secret of the children who never aged would remain, inexorably, indestructible. He had witnessed the truth fully, and it had claimed him. There would be no escape, no return to the world outside. Blackwater endured because of the covenant, and he would endure with it, forever bound to the rhythm, the children, and the village that would never let him go. The mist curled tighter around the streets, the forest whispered its ancient memory, and the children moved silently through the village, guardians of a secret that would never fade. Dr. Hargrove, now irrevocably a part of it, followed, watching, learning, and bound by knowledge that time itself could not undo. The covenant endured. The children never aged, and Blackwater remained, eternal, secret, and alive. And so the children of Blackwater remain, never aging, their secret bound to the village for eternity. What do you think lies beyond the mist? Drop your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Eternal Obsidian for more mysteries that defy time.